There is something about Texas in the 1980s that people who lived through it can't forget. It was the shine of new glass skyscrapers rising over Houston and Dallas, the sound of pickup trucks pulling into office parking lots, and the quiet confidence that Texas was winning while the rest of the country tried to catch up. Cowboy boots were worn with business suits. Friday night football lights glowed over small towns and big cities alike. Oil money still felt endless, opportunity felt close, and ambition filled the air. Texas moved through the decade believing its success was permanent. And if someone lived through it, they know exactly what made that time feel so powerful, so distinctive, and so deeply Texan. The symbols of Texas in the 1980s were impossible to miss. Glass office towers climbed higher each year in Houston and Dallas, reflecting a belief that growth had no ceiling. Pickup trucks filled parking lots outside downtown office buildings, parked beside luxury sedans and imported sports cars. Men wore tailored suits with cowboy boots, blending boardroom ambition with ranch-born identity. High school football stadiums stood like monuments at the edge of towns, larger and brighter than many civic buildings. On television and in magazines, Texas appeared powerful, wealthy, and unapologetically bold. These images told the world that Texas was not following national trends. It was setting its own. Success had a look, and in the 1980s, that look was unmistakably Texan. This became the visual language of Texas confidence. The 1980s was a time when Texas entered the decade riding the momentum of the oil-fueled prosperity of the late 1970s. This meant jobs were plentiful, cities were expanding rapidly, and confidence shaped nearly every decision being made across the state. Houston stood as the energy capital of the world, while Dallas projected financial power and ambition. But as the decade moved forward, that certainty began to crack. Oil prices collapsed in the early 1980s, sending shockwaves through banks, real estate, and entire communities built around energy. Office towers emptied, layoffs spread, and home foreclosures became a common sight. Texas remained business-minded and politically conservative, yet increasingly urban and diverse. The decade forced Texans to confront the reality that prosperity could vanish as quickly as it arrived. This shaped the identity of Texas in the 1980s. Daily life in Texas in the 1980s was closely tied to space, more of it inside and out. Suburban neighborhoods stretched outward from growing cities, filled with ranch-style and brick homes built on wide streets and generous lots. Garages were large, backyards were expected, and central air conditioning was not a luxury, but a necessity. In the early years of the decade, these homes felt easily attainable. Middle-class families bought four-bedroom houses, added swimming pools, and believed the good times would continue. Inside, homes balanced comfort and confidence with practical layouts designed for family life and entertaining. But as the oil economy collapsed, that sense of security faded. For sale signs appeared on familiar streets, and foreclosures quietly reshaped once booming neighborhoods. Still, the physical look of these suburbs remained iconic. This look became instantly recognizable as 1980s Texas living. If this picture of everyday life feels familiar, take a moment to like the video or share it with someone who lived through this era. These memories connect generations. In Texas in the 1980s, the car was not just a way to get around. It was an extension of identity. Pickup trucks were everywhere, driven by construction workers, oilmen, and office professionals alike. They lined suburban driveways and downtown parking garages, signaling practicality, independence, and pride. Large American sedans shared the roads, along with luxury cars purchased during the boom years, when gas prices felt like a minor concern. Commutes were long, highways were wide, and driving long distances was simply part of daily life. Even as the economy shifted, Texans kept moving, believing mobility meant freedom. Behind the wheel, people felt in control of their space and their future. Driving was not just transportation, it was identity. Culture in Texas in the 1980s reflected a state-balancing tradition with a rapidly changing America. Country music remained central to daily life, with artists like George Strait giving the genre a polished modern sound while still honoring Texas roots. Willie Nelson remained a cultural icon, representing independence and authenticity even as mainstream tastes shifted. Fashion told the same story. Cowboy boots were worn with jeans, suits, and even office attire. Big hair, bold colors, and Western details blended with national trends, creating a look that felt confident and unmistakably Texan. Television and popular media often portrayed Texas as wealthy, powerful, and dramatic, reinforcing the idea that the state operated on a larger scale than anywhere else. Living in Texas meant carrying history forward while stepping firmly into modern American culture. Being in Texas meant carrying tradition into modern America. Before we continue, if you enjoy exploring how everyday life really felt in past decades, consider subscribing. There are many more places and memories waiting to be uncovered. Football in Texas in the 1980s was far more than a game. It was the center of community life, especially on Friday nights, when entire towns revolved around high school stadiums glowing under bright lights. Main streets emptied as families, neighbors, and classmates filled the stands. These stadiums were often the largest and most carefully maintained structures in town, symbols of collective pride and identity. College football carried the same intensity. Rivalries like Texas versus Oklahoma were not just sporting events, but cultural rituals passed down through generations. Wins were celebrated statewide, losses felt personally. In a decade defined by economic uncertainty, football provided something steady and familiar. It reminded Texans who they were and what they shared. In Texas, football was identity. Food in Texas in the 1980s was about comfort, tradition, and generosity. Barbecue was serious business, especially brisket slow-cooked for hours and served on butcher paper, often eaten at long communal tables. Tex-Mex was everyday food, not a special occasion. Crispy tacos, cheese-covered enchiladas, refried beans, chips, and salsa were staples of family dinners and casual nights out. Chicken fried steak appeared on nearly every menu, smothered in cream gravy and served in portions meant to satisfy hard appetites. Fast food also played a growing role, with late-night stops at places like Whataburger becoming part of the rhythm of life. Meals were filling, familiar, and deeply tied to place. These flavors defined everyday life in the 1980s. If these tastes and routines bring back memories, leave a comment and share what everyday food meant to you during this time. Life in Texas in the 1980s also carried challenges that became impossible to ignore as the decade progressed. The boom and bust nature of the oil economy left deep marks on families and communities. When oil prices collapsed, jobs disappeared quickly, and entire industries contracted almost overnight. Office buildings sat partially empty, and neighborhoods once filled with optimism faced rising foreclosures. Environmental concerns lingered as well, particularly in industrial areas where air quality suffered. Rapid growth had outpaced planning in many cities, leading to sprawl and congestion. Yet these difficulties were rarely dramatized at the time. Most Texans viewed hardship as temporary, something to push through with resilience and determination. But most people accepted this as part of the era. These challenges shaped real lives. If this reflection resonates, consider sharing the video with someone who remembers this period. What defined Texas in the 1980s was confidence. It was a confidence built during years of growth, tested by sudden loss, and reshaped by experience. Texans entered the decade believing success was permanent, that opportunity would always be there, and that their state stood apart from the rest of the country. When the economy faltered, that belief did not disappear. It adapted. Pride remained, even as expectations changed. People held on to familiar rituals: football on Friday nights, family meals, long drives across open roads. Homes still felt spacious, communities still felt close, and the future, though uncertain, remained something Texans believed they could face. For those who lived through it, the 1980s were a lesson in resilience wrapped in ambition. For those with memories of this remarkable era, there is always more history to explore.